So hello everyone and welcome to this event about Iraq. As you know, last week marked the 20th anniversary of the famous US invasion intervention of the country, an intervention that led to the fall of the then Ba'athist regime of Saddam Hussein, a yes, stable but controversial regime that had been ruling the country for 24 years. This shock for the Iraqi population and for the Iraqi politics as well, of course, was extreme, and it took a while to the country to readapt, to enter into the next phase. As you know, the Coalition Provisional Authority, the CPA, ruled the country for a couple of years, and then since 2006, the first democratic government was established, then led by Nouri al-Maliki. A constitution was drafted and Iraq somehow began its democratic trail. But this process was probably a bit sudden, it was a bit rushed, it was probably ill-conceived, and somehow it planted the seeds for the birth of dysfunctional institutions. At the same time, the security landscape was rapidly deteriorating, intra-sectarian rivalries were growing as well, and this combination of factors gradually dragged the country into a spiral of instability, sometimes violence. We know the very well the recent history of Iraq with the rise of the Islamic State, and this combination of factors also paved the way for sometimes for external interferences within the Iraqi politics and the Iraqi security sector. So why is it important to remember this anniversary? Why are we discussing it today? Because Iraq still struggles with a number of challenges that largely, not entirely of course, but largely have been inherited from that very period of time, that very intervention of 2003. What are these challenges? Where is Iraq heading to today? We will be asking these questions to our guests, whom I'm very happy to introduce to you. Ambassador Rend Al-Rahim, who is the founder and president of the Iraq Foundation, Ambassador Maurizio Greganti, who is Italian ambassador to Iraq currently, and Professor Dlawer Al-Aldin, who is the president and founder of the Middle East Research Institute, MERI. So welcome to our guests. Thank you very much for your kind availability. Before starting to dig into these topics and before launching our event, let me just give a few housekeeping rules. The event is hosted in the frame of the Rome Dialogues, which is the annual conference co-promoted by ISPI and Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to discuss issues concerning the broad, wider Mediterranean region. The Rome Dialogues have reached their 9th edition now, and today's webinar is part of our monthly activities in preparation of the in-person gathering in Rome that this year will take place from November 2 to November 4. I should remind the audience that you have the possibility to ask our guests Q&A via the chat that you find on the website where we are following the conference. And I should also remind that very recently the Rome Dialogues have landed on Twitter, so please feel free to follow our new Twitter account. So let's get into these conversations. So we were saying March 20, 2003, there was really a watershed moment, primarily for the country, which passed from a dictatorship to and slowly moving into democracy. But in many respects, it was a watershed moment for the international order in the Middle East, so in the Middle East region and globally as well. And I would ask a question. I would start with you, Ambassador Al-Rahim. You, at that time, you were acting as Iraq's chief of mission to the United States, exactly when these events were unfolding. So what can you tell us about that moment that changed the history of Iraq? How was the American intervention perceived, specifically in Baghdad's diplomatic circles? Please, Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chiara, and thank you to ISPI for hosting this and inviting me to participate. Yes, indeed, I did become the ambassador to the United States in November 2003, so less than a year after the invasion. It's probably an understatement to say that it was a historic, momentous period. I mean, Iraq was going through nothing less than a revolution, which was playing itself out month after month. Now, I call it a revolution in spite of the fact that it was initiated by a foreign intervention, but it was really a revolution in the very technical sense of upsetting everything, turning everything upside down. And the violence and the earthquake shattering event that really broke down all the institutions that existed for decades in Iraq and was trying to put together with rather less success than one hoped. New institutions and so on. So the country was in total disarray. Now, in terms of the Iraqi reaction inside Iraq, it was, I would say, like all revolutions, it was welcomed by many, but rejected by many others. There were winners and losers, and the winners, of course, were very happy. I would say that the winners were primarily the Shia population and the Kurdish population, who had been utterly oppressed by the previous regime. The losers who were unhappy were principally the old elite, and sorry to speak in those terms, but they happen to be mostly the Sunni population, or largely Sunni. But I'm of course oversimplifying for the sake of brevity. But generally speaking, in the first days, there was a lot of euphoria. But what happened is that very quickly, with the rise of violence and the insurrection that happened, particularly in Western Iraq, and then spread throughout Iraq, and the violence, the euphoria began to ebb. And gradually there was a sourness that happened. The loss of control over the country, the absence of law and order began to affect a lot of people, including those who were very happy with the revolution that happened. So it was a mixed bag, and it was a very unsettled time. And unfortunately, I think you referred to this, that that first year, or even those first months, really set the tone for what was to follow in the years ahead. The seeds of the problems that we had for many, many years afterwards were laid in that loss of control, that loss of law and order, that kind of the violence that happened in the first few months after the invasion, after the collapse of the regime, began to color everything for many years after that. So that was really, in a way, a moment of hope, but also a moment of great distress and difficulty for Iraq. So I talk about a revolution. An old class was removed, was thrown out of office. A new class came into office. Iraq began to, I won't say fracture, but the structure of the state began to change, because suddenly we had a federation between the Arab part of Iraq and the Kurdish part. This was unthinkable under the old regime, but it was really part of the constitutional arrangements that had been envisaged prior to 2003. The idea of federation between Arabs and Kurds, and perhaps a wider federation, was already in progress. The idea was being talked about, and it was implemented through the constitution. But there was a much wider sense of regionalism. The central state did not have the same control as it did in the past. Today, Iraq is a much more regionalized country. I won't call it fractured because that's a negative word, but it certainly does not have the centralized control and the sense of regionalism and provincial control and so on is much stronger, even though it is not always effectively implemented. And of course, we have other problems. The other thing that happened, and that happened very quickly in Iraq, but became more and more obvious with time, is that really for the first time since, I would say, the 17th century, Iran began to have a much greater political influence in Iraq than has happened in the past. And that was a huge change, and a change that has affected and influenced Iraqi politics and Iraqi policies over the last 2 decades. So I think these are the three long-term effects of the change that happened in 2003. There, of course, are many others that one could talk about, but I'm trying to pick the most the ones that really endured over the 2 decades and that have influenced both Iraqi policy, Iraqi actions, Iraqi foreign policy, and domestic practices. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, from one ambassador to another, Maurizio Greganti, building on what Ambassador Al-Rahim was saying, today, according to you, is Iraq in a better place than it was 20 years ago? The American intervention, of course, changed the country's face forever, but how do you judge that change? Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chiara. Thank you to ISPI for organizing this roundtable at this very critical point in time for Iraq. And my warmest regards to my good friends, Ambassador Rend, Professor Dlawer, very nice to see you and to be in this panel with you. Well, I mean, to answer your question, I think that Iraq today is in a much better place than it was in 2003. If we just draw a comparison, 2003, 2023, honestly, I think there is no comparison. What I mean is, in 2003, the country was, honestly, I would call it a pariah state. I mean, it was isolated at the margin of the international community under a brutal dictatorship. The population was struggling. And honestly, the dictator was, I think, stronger than ever. And there was no possibility in sight for a regime change. I saw that, I mean, there is, also a discussion, a debate, also on Iraqi media, now on that epochal moment, regime change. I think everybody agrees that that needed to happen, but many people say, the Iraq war did not need to happen. And those people who argue for that say that, regime change could have happened in any way. The American invasion, the international intervention was not needed. I think, I mean, there is a lot of food for talk about this and for thought, but anyway, it's a fact that international intervention led to a regime change. 2023, today, Iraq is a democracy, even though, I mean, a lot happened these 20 years. The country was always able to hold regular elections, and the last ones were very well organized, according to international monitoring missions. It's true there was a low turnout, but anyway, this is a problem with many democracies, I would say. And in any case, the country is a democracy organized on the basis of a constitution, which establishes as basic parameters rule of law and freedom of expression, trying to play a role, a proactive role, positive role in international relations. So, basically, to answer your question, I would say there is no doubt that Iraq today is in a much better place than it was 20 years ago. Of course, in 20 years, a lot happened. Rend was telling us about what, all the tensions and issues and problems. There is no doubt about that. Maybe, a lot of issues could have been done differently, I would say. But there was also, I would say, a change and an evolution in many things. Sectarianism was very much the name of the game in the period, in the first part of these 20 years. I would argue much less today. I think that there is clearly a national conscience that is, coming out very clearly, and a clear sign was Tishrin 2019, where people were asking for the regime change, but for their homeland, basically. Leaving aside sectarian issues. So I think this is, there are good, positive signs for the future, but I would stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. Of course, at a very difficult 20 years, but Iraq is in a better place. And if I may, historically, 20 years is not even that such a broad time to judge where a country is heading, right? So history and the future will say how things will go. Professor Al-Din, let me come to you and ask specifically about the US role. So the US has been, of course, the crucial player in Iraq since 2003, but Washington's role after that has changed a lot throughout the years. What is the state of Iraq-US relations today? What specifically have the US left in the country? And I don't mean just militarily, but more in general, geopolitically, politically. Dlawer, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you, and thank you to ISPI and my co-panelists, especially that they set the scene for us. The United States and Iraq have engaged for the past 20 years amazingly, and they've gone through phases. We all know those ups and downs. But the current situation is that the two countries are both very keen to make it work. We have two administrations, new administrations, one in Washington, wanting to change perceptions about the US interest and US strategies in Iraq. They want us to believe that their presence in Iraq is because Iraq is strategically important for the United States in its own right, not because of Iran. Even though they are doing a lot of things because of Iran. For example, they want Iraq to be less dependent on Iranian gas and reforming the banking sector so that less dollars go to Iran. So there are many issues that are still Iran-focused, Iran-centered, but nevertheless, this current administration in the United States wants the strategic dialogue with Iraq to work and to be broadened to include security, economics, environment, culture, and so on. And they call that advise, enable, and assist. Essentially, they want a different type of relation, less securitized, and they want to have a presence because that's critical for them, not just in Iraq, but in Syria and beyond. So that's the US end. And by the way, this administration, the Biden administration, were a bit kind of cautiously or wary of the current government in Iraq, and they hesitated initially, thinking that this is a product of the coordination framework that is more known to be pro-Iranian. Therefore, they initially approached it with caution. But then now later things develop fast, and they are now actively engaging this government and wanting this relation to work. And all these because the government of Mohammed Shia Sudani has also been focused on changing perceptions about their government. They don't want to be seen to be in the context of Iran. The Sudani, Mohammed Shia Sudani, the prime minister, has emphasized that he would welcome strong relations with the United States because U.S. relations are important for Iraq. Iraq faces a lot of challenges, taking it from ISIS and security to economy to environment to finance and so on. And the Sudani government also emphasizes that they want good relations with everyone based on national interest, based on mutual interest. So the Iraqi government is making all the right rhetoric while the US government is welcoming those and getting closer. And of course, the United States also wants to change perception in the entire Middle East. They keep saying that we are here to stay. And Iraq is a very good example, a case in point that they want to show indeed they are serious about Iraq and making Iraq work. So that's really, in a nutshell, today's new development. The past 6 months has been full of very interesting, positive moves from both sides with a bit of optimism, while everybody knows it's difficult. And the near future may well be a good reflection of that. And of course, whatever the United States does will have a huge impact on the Europeans. And that's what Ambassador Greganti would be probably emphasizing or be commenting. And the Europeans are following that. They are equally interested and optimistic about relation with this new government who's been doing the right thing so far, making the right moves and investing in the right areas that please the international partners. Now, this administration in the United States may continue to do this, but let's not forget that Iran-US rivalry will always be present, will always be influencing events, while the Iraqi government is trying to be more Iraqi, more Iraq-focused, and to be keeping good relations with Iran as well as the US. So those ups and downs of the past hopefully would be over. Now, the last part of your question was the American presence. Now, if you ask the Americans, they would say it's a very small presence. It's minimum, the absolute minimum necessary number of troops that we need to protect our interests and our diplomats in the area. Any less than that, we will be out of here, which is true. And they also say this is not a combat presence. This is more like to advise, enable, and assist. They consider Iraq now still a voice of moderation in the Middle East and an emerging democracy. And so basically, the United States wants to shift attention away from troops and military and so on, and wanting people to forget about the attacks on Qasem Soleimani and the drones and so on, more into economic engagement. And in the context of the global power competition, the United States is very focused on what China does in Iraq and how Iraq is treating China, Russia, and Iran. So that's where the caution comes in, combined with the optimism of both singing their songs. I hope that would answer your questions, Chiara, and it's over to you.
It did. Thank you, Dlawer. Let me go back for a second round of questions. Ambassador Greganti, I would start with you now. Briefly, what is the state of Iraq's democracy today? What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses of this 20-year-old democracy in Iraq?
Thank you, Chiara. Well, I mean, this is a very good point, which is quite discussed also on on the media and in public debates. Critics say that regular elections, which have been there since the change of regime in Iraq are just a veneer of democracy, because in the end it's always the same people, same leaders who are in government. I would be very cautious with such a judgment. First, because the reality is never black and white, so clear cut. And then I would also say that we have had now 20 years in Iraq with a democratic system, and we always had a peaceful handover of power, which, it's no mean feat. Elections were always held regularly, and last ones were also, I would say, successful by every parameter. Of course, a very important one was not what we wanted to see. I mean, the turnout was not high, but this is, as I said before, this is an issue concerning many, many democracies in the world. And in general, we should consider that, democracy is not common in the region. Let's put it this way. So I wouldn't underestimate the situation where we are in Iraq. Elections are for real, even though, it was always a difficult situation. As Ambassador Rend was saying, power is very much diffused in Iraq. There is no strong center. Of course, there are important stakeholders and vested interests, but that does not mean that they can always impose their will. And if we look at the parliament today in Iraq, it's a parliament which has a lot of independence, a lot of new faces compared to the previous setup of the parliament before 2021. As I said, the big challenge now is the turnout and how to bring people back to the polls. Because, of course, if they turn up in big numbers and are able to organize themselves, they can make a difference. And now in Iraq, there is a heated discussion on the electoral law, which is being discussed, and actually the parliament approved a new electoral law for provincial elections and for the parliamentary elections. This is very recent, and the discussion is very much going on. Provincial elections will be held on November 6th. And that's also very interesting, because that means that Iraq will soon enter in a sort of electoral campaign. And I'm sure that this will have also consequences among in the relations between the political actors. And we don't know yet about the next parliamentary elections. But of course, this electoral law was very much discussed. Also, there were a lot of protests in the country. People argue that this is going back, it's a step back to the past, to the previous law. Because it goes back to proportional representation, goes back to bigger districts than it was the case in the last elections. I think that on this the jury is out. I would say we have to see what will happen. Really, it's very difficult in every system to forecast what will be the real result of a change in the electoral system. Many times, ruling coalitions have changed electoral systems to what they thought was to their advantage, and then it was not the case. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. And according to some, if independents, for example, are able to organize themselves, maybe they could do very, very good in the next elections with this new system. I mean, we will see, and this is to be seen. But I think to answer your question, I think the state of Iraqi democracy is good. Of course, we could always do better, there is no doubt, but that's true for every country.
True, I do agree, Ambassador. And I would ask Ambassador Al-Rahim if she agrees with what Ambassador Greganti has been saying. What is the state of Iraq's democracy years after the adoption also of the 2005 constitution? What are the challenges that the current political system is facing? What measures, according to you, should Baghdad prioritize for successful political reforms? Ambassador, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I would agree with Ambassador Greganti to the extent that having elections is far better than not having elections. I mean, we talk about democracy, and certainly under the old regime of the Ba'ath, there were never any elections, and now we have them. And the fact that we have elections means there is at least the potential and the possibility of change. And that is very important, because even if change doesn't come immediately, visibly, you always have the possibility of changing. And that's really, I think, a cardinal point about democracy, about elections and so on. No matter how deformed they are, they hold the possibility. Okay. Now, I am less sanguine than Ambassador Greganti about the state of democracy in Iraq, partly because, as he said, we have in Iraq a consociational system, and which means that, you know, different sort of groups within society, within the sort of social makeup, have to be in the process. Now, there's a lot to be said for become rigid. And yes, indeed, you do see the same faces, whether it is in the Shia constituency or the Kurdish or the Sunni. You see the same faces, you see the same names, and the mobility of the system is extremely limited. And I think this is a problem. And what has happened over the various iterations of elections and so on is that a large part of the population, because of the closed system that has been created, closed and, as I said, calcified, they have felt left out. Now, in 2021, because of the protests of 2019, as Ambassador Greganti mentioned, there was a change in the electoral law, and it did allow fresh input, fresh blood to come into the political system. Not in huge numbers, in limited numbers, but it did present an opening. There was suddenly a crack in that wall, that consociational muhassasa wall. It began to crack and light came in, if you want. Okay. And that was a wonderful thing. And it was paid for, by the way, by hundreds of people who lost their lives in the protests. Probably 700 people or more lost their lives, but that was the result. Now, so the problem of exclusion is a serious problem in Iraq. And this, if we want to reform the political system, that problem has to be addressed. And it has to be addressed throughout the country. I'm not singling out any constituency or any region. The system has to open up to new voices, new people, fresh ideas, fresh approaches. So I think that is an essential element. The other thing is that there has been, for many years, talk about reform of the Constitution. Everybody recognizes that the Constitution has ambiguities, contradictions, in fact, has items that are unworkable. And we saw that in the last elections and the previous elections, where the requirements of the constitution for the election of a president and a prime minister were simply unworkable. I'm singling that out, but there are many items in the constitution, and much of it also relates to the relationship between the center and the federated Kurdish region. A lot of that has to be addressed within the constitution so that there can be normal, problem-free relations between the two sides. So constitutional reform is a really important element for political reform. And finally, I think that political reform cannot happen unless and until the government, the central government, imposes rule of law and controls the uncontrolled spread of weapons. I think you cannot have parallel armies. You can't have freelancing militias, tribes that are armed to the teeth, and the central government has no say over the use of arms. And I think that is important for political reform, because unless people feel that there really is rule of law, they will be afraid to participate. The possibility of intimidation, we've seen that happening a lot, and throughout the last 20 years, and I think more and more so right now. And so rule of law really and control of uncontrolled weaponry is an important factor of political reform.
Yeah, I agree, Ambassador. Thank you for bringing it in. Dlawer Al-Din, let me come to you. Constitutional democracy and Baghdad's Erbil relations are an important element that fits into this. How can we assess these relations 2 decades after the war? What are the main drivers of cooperation between the Kurdish government and the Baghdad's government, and what instead are, if there are, and I think there are sources of attrition? Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. Just a comment on the constitution. By the way, we all know that constitutions need changing with time after practice, but when it's not practiced, when it's not implemented, what are we changing and to what? If we had the will and determination to implement what is already there thoroughly, then we can say time to revise and make it better. So essentially, our problem is that everyone, without exception, whether Shia, Kurd, or Sunni, everybody's been selective in what they wish to choose in terms of implementing as well as interpreting. And that's why it's really not a question of changing it, because it will be on ink on paper anyway, no matter how good is the text. The constitution problem has also been a fundamental issue that created an unhealthy center-periphery relationship that includes Erbil and Baghdad. I mean, the centralization tendencies in Baghdad is still growing, even though the constitution makes it less centralized. So essentially, the Erbil-Baghdad relation is unique in its own way. Let me just begin by saying both Baghdad and Erbil both failed to make the relationship work. Neither the Kurds went to Baghdad trying to own it collectively and share power as if it's theirs, nor Iraq and Baghdad actually embrace the Kurds and try to really win them over. So it's a mutual thing. It's not just one-sided. But the relationship has been determined by power balance. And currently, we are living in the post-referendum relationship, because before that, Kurdistan region developed economic independence, was doing well, it was growing in its economy, in its investment, and so on. And it had good international presence. So it was acting like a state and treating Baghdad like another. And the relationship was not federal central, because Kurdistan enjoyed privileges that were more than what the constitution allows, i.e. more than just a federal entity. It was confederal even more. But after the referendum, and by the way, the referendum, that Baghdad was not in any state to impose its will over Erbil. But after the referendum, Kurdistan went into a different scenario. It's now economically not independent. It's it's facing challenges with Baghdad, Tehran, and Ankara. And everybody's interested in reducing the federal, even the federal description or federal status of Erbil. They have tried to ensure that this Erbil always goes back to Baghdad, and in Baghdad, through the court, through the Supreme Court and political power games and dynamics, they have all made sure that Erbil is pretty isolated. And Erbil also, has internal problems between the two major parties who actually had two different policies. The two ruling parties in Kurdistan have two different policies towards Baghdad. One of them has been strategically and for a long time engaging Baghdad very closely. The other one was not. So essentially, with this new situation, we now have a new feel, a new mentality or mindset, even in both sides. In Erbil, everybody, both parties, actually now describe Baghdad as their only gateway, or the best gateway, but it's the only gateway, and they need to go back to Baghdad and re-own it, and share power and be supportive of good governance, stability, so that Iraq works for all. And conversely, Baghdad has grown into really accepting that Kurdistan has to be protected, has to be embraced, has to be included, and that it has a special status internationally as well as nationally. It is an actor not to be underestimated, so that everybody is now racing to engage the Kurdish leaders, whether it's post-election in government formation, whether it's actually in making things work. So now we are in a stage where both sides, Erbil and Baghdad, want to negotiate a better oil and gas law, negotiate better arrangements for budget law, and make the security arrangement work. And Erbil wants, obviously, to get rid of the Iranian and Turkish invasions, whether via air or land. We don't have sea, otherwise we would have seen that too. So basically, Erbil needs protection, and Baghdad is a better partner who can protect that, including other partners internationally. So basically, there is a mutual attraction to make this relationship work. And the current government of Sudani has been actually trying to be more accommodating and conciliatory. So we are fairly optimistic that the next phase, we will see a better relationship. The problems between the two sides are so deep, so structural, so chronic, so difficult, they will not disappear overnight, and they're only transit. But where there is a will, there is a way of making it work and let it evolve. At the moment, we've not put the events and the actors on the right track for the right evolution. We're hopeful that the lessons of the past would make them, force them into striking a better relationship and evolving by design, not leaving it to nature. Over to you.
Thank you, Dlawer. Thank you, Dlawer, for ending on this very positive note. I would like to make a last and third round of questions, but I must ask our guests to be very, very brief before opening up to the audience, because we are already running out of time. Ambassador Al-Rahim, in 1 minute, how did the relationship between the state and the civil society evolved throughout the years after the regime change? If you can be extremely brief, we have a list of Q&A to answer after that. Thank you. Ambassador, you're muted. Sorry to interrupt you. Muted. No, okay, now.
Yeah, before 2008, there was no civil society in Iraq. It was a totalitarian state. So one of the things that happened with the change is that civil society has really flourished. And you have a lot of NGOs, CSOs, you have a lot of associations and so on. And civil society is very healthy in Iraq. The state has been reasonably accommodating of the flourishing of civil society, and has worked. Both the government, the parliament, and so on have been willing to work with NGOs, CSOs, charities, and what have you. So that is one of the bright spots. The only thing that worries me is that there is now going on some tightening over free speech, free expression. We've seen that in the last year or so. The media, for example, there's a multitude of media. Most of them are owned by political parties, most, not all, but at least you get a multiplicity of voices, and that's really important. But there has been a lot of tightening lately, and that's worrisome. But civil society has fought back, and in some ways has succeeded. And in fact, civil society has raised issues to the Supreme Court and on some laws that are unconstitutional, and they have even won cases. Now, this is not only unprecedented in Iraq, it's probably unprecedented in the region to have that kind of power. So I think we need to watch very carefully, but I would say that civil society is in a better place now than it has ever been in Iraq.
Ambassador, let me just ask you very briefly, because this relates to a question that arrived for you, in one sentence, very specifically about the role of younger generations within civil society today.
Yeah. We have a vibrant young generation, and politically they are. They feel alienated, they are not included, and I think this is one of the problems of the political system that we have, and I alluded to that. However, they are much more politically aware. Since 2019, one of the things that the protest of 2019 did was really spread political awareness. They raised the level of political awareness amongst young people. It was mostly a youth-led movement for the most part. And I have seen, and I talk to young people all the time, I have seen that young people are much more aware of political issues as opposed to just issues of jobs and the economy. And I think that they do want to participate. They need a role. They want a role, and they should be given a role. And we haven't really seen that yet.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Dlawer Al-Din, back to you. I wanted to ask, since 2003, Iran has established itself, of course, as Iraq's most active, perhaps, regional player. What is the state of Iraq-Iran relations? And this also relates, actually, to a Q&A that we received for you, Dlawer, asking how will the recently signed agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brokered by China, will resonate in Iraq? So in 1 to maximum 2 minutes, if you can, mix these two questions, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, basically, Iran's relation with Iraq has been transformed, changed. It's no longer a question of interference. Iran's hegemony is overwhelming, top down and bottom up. So essentially, Iran is fairly confident, and it's not insecure about this relationship. And it will stay this way for a long, long time. They started with this approach, state, non-state actors, until they overwhelmed Baghdad. Then after ISIS, they did that in the Sunni areas. Now with the Kurdish internal problems, they are now gradually doing the same in Kurdistan. So let's not think about Iran as a stranger or something. It's actually replaced the United States in a big way. But nevertheless, Iraqis have proven that they really are pro-Iraqis. At the end of the day, Iran, there's a limit how much it can drive this securitization and this overwhelming hegemony. There is an inherent resistance that's emerging, whether it's from the civil society or certain populistic parties, or actually pure interest, conflicts of interest. People are not really any more interested in funding non-state actors in Syria and Yemen and elsewhere. So basically, things are likely to change, and the current government in Baghdad, although it's a product of the coordination framework, as I said, which is largely pro-Iranian, that they are actually being pretty tough on the Iranians in terms of the funding, the money that used to be siphoned or paid to the Iranians, whatever they were owed, and also these adhering or abiding by the U.S. Treasury measures that would limit how much fund leaves Iraq. So basically, this Iraqi government is trying to show that Iraq is first, at least in certain areas. So that's one. The second part, I can't remember exactly. If you just one word to remind me, then I can comment on it.
How will the China broker Saudi-Iranian deal resonate in Iraq, if you will?
I think on the whole, it's a very positive thing, because Iraqis think that they will have a breather, they have a kind of a rest, and they would be less subject to this rivalry that Iraq is being the backyard of not just Saudi Iran, but Iran and the rest. So Iraq may have a break for a while, and there should be some more inward investment, and maybe more Gulf money coming in with cooperation between the neighbors, so that Iraq's infrastructure could be built and so on. The United States has led Iraq to engage China in a constructive way. I don't think there is any worry that this improved relations would in any way be damaging to Iraq or bad news. If anything, it's up to the Iraqi leaders to play it right. The onus of rebuilding Iraq and putting Iraq back on track is not really outside, not in Washington, not in Tehran, it's in Baghdad. So it's the Iraqis that need to really be good statesmen, good politicians, and strike a good balance in this complex dynamics globally and regionally, and push Iraq forward. And I think that's the mood at the moment, because everybody's had enough of not doing the right thing for their country.
Thank you, Dlawer. Thank you very much. Ambassador Greganti, you have the last word, and I would like to ask you about Iraq-Italy relations. And as someone from the audience is asking particularly on the economic developments that have been unfolding in the country for the past 20 years, without entering into details of that, of course, we don't have time, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more on, focus your last answer on the Italian-Iraqi cooperation on the economic perspective. Thank you very much. And I should ask you to be very brief. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chiara. In a snapshot, I would say that Italy has always been at the side of Iraq all over those years, and it will always be. We have a very strong friendship, and that's based on common interests. We have every interest to support a stable Iraq, to see it develop as a crucial player. It's already a crucial player, but to develop even more as a proactive, positive player in the region. And it's for us, it's a key interlocutor also in economic affairs. I mean, first and foremost in energy, no doubt. Our companies are very much there, very strong in that. The relationship is very good. It's been, growing, and according to the data, last year, export is growing, import is growing, and I really hope that the new stability that we are seeing in Iraq since last summer will help us to develop this even more. We have seen a lot of activity by our European friends in Iraq recently, and we Italians, we want to do our lot as well, for sure. So, and that's also my job in the country, and I will do my best. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you to all our guests and to the audience that was listening to us. It was a pleasure to talk to you and delve into this fascinating, complicated country. Thank you very much for giving your perspectives. We will keep following Iraq, of course, and I hope to see you all very, very soon. Thank you, Ambassador Greganti, Ambassador Al-Rahim, and our friend Dlawer Al-Din. Thank you very much. and see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.